Hello, welcome back to the Scale Building Cafe, and welcome to the next part in the post-apocalyptic Hobby Boss 1/48 scale AN-2 Colt. Oh, that's a mouthful, isn't it? Right, so on with the detailing of the cabin first off. So these are some strips of plastic card from Microstrip, and it's a relatively simple job to do a quick measure and then just put them in place. So here in the forward cabin there is actually some detail, but it is quite shallow, it's not very pronounced, so I just used that as a pattern and just literally stuck it on over the top. But down to the rear, obviously in the kit this is behind a sealed bulkhead. So what I need to do is I need to just mark out, using the front cabin as a guide on this tape, I'm just going to mark out exactly where the vertical strips need to go down here, down the back. And jumping forward in time, we can put them in. Now, I think in hindsight what I should have done is not cut these before, just cut them roughly, but they're too long, and then I could just get it exactly right, just trim it when it's dry, which is a few seconds really. But anyway, it worked. And trying to get everything symmetrical between the two halves was actually a little bit tricky. It's important because they, over the top, they are going to line up. And as you can see, tweezers are an absolute must, and this is the advantage of the ammo cement and that really thin brush. It's really precise. You only get a small amount of glue, no more than you need, and it really does make for some precision work. So these digital calipers were really quite cheap actually, not that much at all. I can't remember where I got them from, probably Amazon or eBay or one of those. And they really are really good for this work. What would be even better would be one of those chopper things, so you can get them all exactly the same length. But yeah, this works. Oops, dropped it through the window there. And again, as I said before, I think in hindsight it would have been easier to cut these too long, glue them in position, and then just trim them later. Need about 4 pairs of hands for this, but we're getting there. So you do have a few seconds once you've glued it in place that you can just manipulate it into exactly the right position just before the glue sets rock hard. Right, so that's the formers done. Now for the stringers, and it's the same concept, but now we have to be even more precise with the measuring, and sometimes I didn't get that quite right. If it's too short, then you've got to go back and you've got to cut another piece. If it's too long, it doesn't really matter because you can just glue it to one side, and then when that's dry you can just trim it and then push it down and glue the other side. So I think if I was being really pedantic, what I should have done is, when I riveted the outside, is copied this structure, riveted that, and actually followed the rivet pattern with this. That's just far too difficult, and frankly life is too short. I'm sure no one would actually pick it up, and if they did and made a comment, then I think that says more about them than me, frankly. this is a fantasy vehicle after all. And this is quite tedious, but it is absolutely essential, I think. You could probably get away with it in the front, but definitely here down the back, obviously, because it was never designed to be seen anyway in the actual kit. So clearly they didn't bother doing the structure, so it has to be done down the back. But it really does make for a really busy surface. But just on these two bits here, I could have fast forwarded it, I could have jumped forward in time, but I just thought it was interesting just to show you how long it actually takes. Now this bit down by the door, this is what I was talking about earlier, and you can see just on the gunner's hatch down the back, I've done it as well, is rather than measure it all out, just cut a bit that's a little bit too long, glue it in position, and by the time you get down to the bottom, everything's dry enough that you can go and just trim it in situ. Definitely the way ahead. And again, all this is going to be really quite visible because obviously the door that I've opened there. Sorry for the hand and the wrist and the watch getting in the way, but trying to pick a suitable camera angle and get right close in to see what I'm doing, and with the glue and everything, yeah, I couldn't quite do it, I'm afraid, so sorry for that. And then I've got these display cutters which are really precise. They're brilliant, they're really expensive, but they're definitely worth it. Mega sharp, and you just come in and just trim it off. And then using some of the offcuts, we can just go in and just finish off near the door. So I'm trying to get the angle right here without blocking the camera view. And the glue dries really quite quickly actually, so you don't have to wait too long. As you can see, I've just uploaded this and filmed this all in real time, just so you can have a sense of exactly how long it's going to take. Right, more detailing now, more plastic card and strip and whatnot. So this is the forward cabin roof. If you saw the last part, you saw me cutting out the top of the roof on the fuselage bit. I actually went in after that and did it to the actual roof. So this is where the gunner is going to sit for the mid-upper turret. So obviously it needs to be all open. I did think, well, I could rather than getting the Lancaster turret with a person in there, I could just buy a quick boost sort of barbette for a P61 or something. But I thought, no, it'd be quite cool to actually have like an old manned turret, and it's an excuse to add in a load more detail, and it will let some light through the top as well, so we can see all that detail that's going to be down the back cabin. And it's just a question of letting your imagination run away with itself, really. There we go, we're getting there. I'll add some more bits to that later when I get a flush of inspiration. Right, this is the aft bulkhead. So this is 3D printed by a friend of the channel, Nige. And the idea with this was to have a little bit of like a submarine hatch feel. Here's the main cabin. So this does build up a little bit like a sort of a helicopter kit, and it's all a bit wobbly, frankly. So there's a bit of that. Later on, I did drill and pin that, which did help. But I don't want to glue that until it's all painted, really. because there's a whole load of detail that I'm going to add to that. And that rear bulkhead, I am going to cut out the doors as well. But this is just to illustrate, as I went along, I was test fitting all the time, because what I didn't want to do is just add a really cool piece of detail and then come to glue the fuselage halves together, and it didn't fit. Right, this is the middle bulkhead with the 2 doors, so more chain drilling. You see what a mess it makes. I've actually got a little sort of desktop hoover thing, handheld job, sits in the palm of your hand, probably about the size of an orange. That's really cool. Makes very quick work of cleaning up. Especially important if it's, you can see the mess there. Especially if you've got resin bits and pieces and dust. There's the little hoover. That's the name of it. And then, as with the fuselage halves, opening up the holes, it's just in with the scalpel to remove the parts, and then in with the big file just to square everything off. What I'm doing here is just bending some of this strip, because when I just had a look at the aft section, I thought what I really need is to continue the structure north. I think in hindsight what I should have done is just done that all one piece. But my original intention was to do a roof over the top, but I thought that might bring the ceiling down a little bit too much. And actually I think it'd be rather more cool to have all the structure on show. I did add that little blanking piece on the other side there. You can see I've done a bit on the floor as well, and test fitting to make sure that's going to fit. And yeah, it's quite cavernous there. A little bit of manipulation required, what with all the bulkheads there and everything. But it all, with a satisfying click, went into place. Using the bulkhead as a template, I cut some plastic card out, and then I just used some small bit of lead to make the hinges, and then that was glued on. You see there me using the punch to simulate the rivets. Now, in hindsight, I shouldn't have used the lead foil for the hinge, because it just wasn't strong enough and it kept on falling apart, to be honest. And I did want it workable. I could have done what, if you're aware of the A4 Garage channel, and he does these super detailed cars, absolutely phenomenal work. It's miniature engineering, really. I could have copied him, but you know, for speed. Plumbing. So here's the loo, printed by Nige, and I thought that actually, where's the water going to come from to refill the cistern every time it flushes? And what I did is just drilled a bit of a hole in the top just to accept this plastic coated wire. And this stuff's really good because it, when you bend it, it holds its shape, and it is quite robust and would take paint easier than wire. So that was bent to shape, and then from I can't remember what this bit was from, half a drop tank or something, I just capped the ends, added a little filler pipe at the top, drilled a hole. So this is the water storage tank for the cistern. Bent a bit of pipage there just for interest. I could have gone straight up, but you know, just create a little bit more interest. I'm going to roughly cut it to size, and then what I'll do is drill a hole in the water tank, and that will sit there all quite nicely, and we'll just plumb it in. So just feed the pipe into the hole, and then I've drill and pin the actual base of the loo just to make it a bit more secure, just so it's not a butt joint. You can see there the pin in the floor. So again, this is where you need 7 pairs of hands, and we'll just fit there. In it goes. Brilliant. I like a bit of sense of humour in my model sometimes. Right, air conditioning now. So this is a bit of plastic tube, which just with a lighter I bent to shape. And this will be plugged into the aircon unit that will be mounted on the outside. I did actually drill another hole slightly lower than that because I wanted it level with the window. So there's the aircon unit, again one of Nigel's specials, and what I did is I just held it into place and used this L-shaped plastic card just to make the mounting. And what's good is the plastic cement doesn't react with the resin. It's going to need to be glued on with super glue. So there's no danger of actually sticking the resin to the plastic card. So that would just pop out. And the sort of mounting bits are all there. And you can see the hole there for the pipe that goes in. You see I've done some of the gun mounting at the bottom, but I had to modify that later on. It was sat too high. Some leftover photo etch. That was I can't remember what this set was from, if I'm honest, but these little sort of riveted circle things were ideal for covering up the holes in the floor. That's for all the troop seats. And this is the bulkhead at the front, the cockpit bulkhead. I didn't add the door, I just wanted to leave that open. And then again, just using my imagination, just did some storage racks. These are the radios that were printed by Nige. So just a bit of plastic strip, and then these can be glued together to make a pair, like that. And then we can just make this plastic card mounting for it. I'll add some more plastic card in a sec, but that will sit there. Okay, there's the other bit of plastic card, and that just slots in quite nicely. You can see the mounting on the other side for the smaller radios. Same sort of thing. And I've drilled some holes in there, and that'll be for a whole load of wiring later. Back to the roof. And this is just scrap bits and pieces. I think those bits I'm adding there were from left over from a 72nd Hind that were just modified to fit. Anything you can see in that tan colour is from the Humvee kit, the 48th Humvee from Tamiya. And again, it's just letting your imagination run riot, really. This was from various, you know, I think half a missile or something. A few other bits stuck on. So that's the mechanism for the turret. And when you're using a lot of multimedia stuff, so obviously there's a lot of resin, plastic, photo etch, it's a good idea to prime. It's not that I was necessarily worried about the paint not sticking. It's just if everything's one colour, undercoat like this grey, then when you put the top coat down, it's all going to be the same colour. And I'm going to go for the Tamiya yellow green primer on the inside colour, the zinc chromate. I think they call it, is it XF4 yellow green? I'll have to go and check that. But it just unifies everything. Ready for the top coat. You see there's a cocktail stick just glued to the back of the bulkhead. The bulkhead's not glued in at this stage, it's just because you'll see me take it out now. And that means I've got a nice little natty handle that I can hold it when I paint it, and I'll paint that separately. It's just going to be easier to paint and weather and then stick it in at the end. I did have to chamfer the edges a bit actually, just because the fuselage sides curve in. This is the cockpit bulkhead, and you saw me detailing it earlier. And I scratch built that overhead panel for the pilots in between, and we'll add a whole load of detail on that later. The primer is Mr. Surfacer I think it's 1500, thinned quite heavily, so it goes down nice and smooth. Not forgetting the loo and the radios and all sorts of bits and pieces. So all these small bits, I tend to drill a hole where it's not going to be seen and insert a cocktail stick. I think that's much easier. Right, the cockpit floor, you can see there one of the seats from the Humvee kit, and that's a mix of red brown and hull red for a rusty steel undercoat. So we'll chuck down a layer of hairspray. And we're going to do some hairspray chipping on this. We'll just dry it off with the airbrush. And I did actually go and hit that with a hairdryer. And then undercoated with white, because the opacity of the yellow-green isn't that great, and it just helps with a bit of sort of pre-shading. Not that I'm a big fan of pre-shading at all, but it does have its uses every now and again, and this was one of them. So yeah, I don't know why that's not in shot, sorry about that. We'll try and keep that in shot. There we go. And I just want a nice kind of solid coat before we come in with the chipping. So just using my favourite old cut down stipply brush and using some water, we'll just do it in a scrubbing action. And what happens here is the water will soak through the paint, dissolve the hairspray, and then lift up the top coat, which is dry, and it kind of cracks and splinters and chips, just like the real thing. I concentrated the where I think we'd get most, so up and down the middle was sort of concentrated on, where that crewman's feet are going to be as well. And you can see what an awesome effect it does. And later on, when I'm doing the painting of the thing, I use this technique extensively. Same on the back. This is tread plate. It's just plastic card that's embossed with the tread plate pattern, and that picks up the detail really quite nicely. Now for some sort of greebly things. This is a little resin thing from Aerobonus, some sort of tank jobby. So I thought, yeah, let's just do a bit of hairspray chipping on this and just dress it up with a few decals and things. That little spike on the top, that's going to have a rubber hose that I put in, and then that went into the up at the top where the mechanism for the turret was. So maybe it's some kind of hydraulic reservoir or something like that. Who knows? And then that was just dressed up with a few airscale decals, which I used quite extensively on this project actually. This is just a thing that I just painted up in yellow and black stripes. I thought that looked quite cool. That's from the Humvee kit. And a little bit of weathering on the loo. Don't be put off by the brown wash, nothing to do with that. It just, I think, complemented the white quite nicely, and that's MRP white that was painted in, which gives a nice sort of ceramic finish. Paint chipping on the radios, you see the little hole there, that was just for the cocktail stick which I mounted when I sprayed it. That was MRP black, which gives that nice kind of satin black finish, and then we just distress that with just a bit of ammo steel applied with the sponge, and that gives quite a nice effect too. Quite a few these little fire extinguisher things. Again, they had some decals put on just to dress those up. And this was the M60, which I made a mount for, and that goes by the rear cargo door. I did put the ammo box at the floor. So that's some of the greeblies dealt with. Now for the main weathering. So the interior had been painted with the Tamiya yellow green, like the zinc chromate colour. It was then given a gloss, and then just a yellowy brown wash. And you can see the gloss there just really helps with the enamel wash. Just capillary action just draws it along all that detail, and that's really quite effective. And it's actually quite cathartic, this. You'll see a little bit of detail there above the gunner's window. Again, that's the instrument panel from the Humvee. So just kind of using bits all over the place, really. And when that's dry, we can just go in with a cotton bud and just clean up most of the excess. Just give it a gentle rub. It's dry, but there's no thinners on that at all. You don't need it if it's over a gloss surface. If it's over a matte surface, it kind of soaks into the matte, even satin, which you can use to your advantage, but it is going to make it a little bit more difficult to clean up the excess, and you will need thinner then on the cotton bud. And just to neaten things up and just clean the middle of the panels, just a small brush with a little bit of thinner. It really helps to sort of sharpen things up, and you do get a kind of a filter effect, which I didn't want on the yellow. Right, back to the sponge and more sponge chipping, this time with the steel tone, which I think looks really nice against the yellow green. And this can use to back up the hairspray chipping that we did earlier as well. Just gives really fine scratches. See, that's quite thick where the door is. I wish it was thinner, but hey ho, can't have everything. Right, friend of the channel Nige printed this for me. So that was sponge chipped, as was the armoured door from the Humvee. A little bit of plastic card at the top to make it bigger. I wanted that really heavily distressed. And the sponge works an absolute treat on there. And using some of the Red Fox placards from the B1B set, and more of that in next week's episode. This is the sort of mechanism that I made for the turret. Just wired that up. You can't see too much of that in the finished thing, but if you look really hard you can, and I'm really pleased with how that turned out. This is the cabin side of the cockpit bulkhead. You can see I've mounted the radios and I've just started to wire things up, and I just used a few little thin strips of lead foil just to make sort of little connectors, really, just to hold the wire in place. Just dresses up and adds up to the detail, and there is the finished bulkhead. And there is the finished fuselage half as well, with the gun and the sort of bottle thing all mounted in and all wired up. Really quite busy, I think. And that's it for the end of part 3. Coming up in part 4, we're going to deal with the cockpit. So I do some washes and stuff on some Mohawk seats. We build up the cockpit and the instrument panel. And you can see how busy the fuselage half is. And I wonder if it's all going to fit. Ooh. So join me in part 4 and you'll see how I get on with the cockpit and see whether actually it all fits in. So I'll see you then. Thank you. Bye-bye.